A big car at a moderate price. Menards enclosed auto rack on this episode of Toy Train Tips and Tricks. Hello again, this is Mike with another episode of Toy Train Tips and Tricks. And so today I was innocently walking through an area of Menards. I was going to get some wire nuts and some electrical tape. And on my way to the checkout, of course, I took a glance over to the toy and pool supply aisle. And there was a fresh flat cart stacked with brand new boxes. And I knew that meant they were restocking the train department. So a quick glance, I saw a lot of things that looked familiar from last year, buildings and such. And then there was this brand new box that said Auto Carrier. Now, Menards first released the Auto Carrier right after Christmas 2022, late January, early February. And I never actually seen one of these in the stores. They sold out very quickly online. So I think this is a new batch, which makes sense. This was a brand new case of them. So we're going to open it up, take a look. Now, one thing I noticed right off the bat, I think this is new too. And right here we have a Prop 65 warning for California. So does that mean that Menards can sell these online in California now? Let's take our now familiar clamshell box and let's open it up and see what we've got to work with here. This Menards Auto Carrier is an excellent representation of contemporary cars, but what about earlier auto carriers? From the Model T to the early 1950s, the most common way of transporting automobiles by rail was in special, usually 50-foot, double-door boxcars. These cars had internal racking system that would allow for the transport of up to 6 standard-size automobiles. Lionel's number 2758 and number 6468 cars are a good representation of these. By the early 1950s, railroads were looking for ways to move, load, and unload vehicles faster and easier to help them keep up with America's automobile culture. One proposed solution was the Evans Autoloader, as depicted by Lionel's number 6414 car. Unfortunately, the Lionel version was far more successful than the real car, as only 2 prototype models were ever produced. By 1953, railroads began experimenting by attaching 2 and 3 tiers of racking to existing flat cars, and the modern auto rack was born. By the late 1950s, railroads had settled on an 89-foot design as the effective standard size for these open auto racks. Also, it became standard railroad practice for an equipment leasing firm, such as TTX, to own the flat cars themselves, with the racks purchased and owned by the individual railroads. There are a number of accounting reasons for this arrangement that are really too complex for us to discuss here, but it works. From the late 1950s to 1973, the open auto rack was king, such as the Lionel MPC era open tri-level auto racks. As damages from weather, thieves, and vandals piled up, railroads searched for ways to protect their automotive cargo, and by 1973, the first fully enclosed auto rack was developed. But it took another decade before these represented the majority of cars in the U.S. railroad fleet, and open auto racks could still be seen occasionally on U.S. railroads until the mid-1980s. Lionel's enclosed auto rack is a good representation of these early enclosed racks. All right, so let's pop it open. There, here we go. So here we have it, and right away there are some very good things, and there are some okay things. Let's start with the good. This is a good representation of a modern enclosed auto carrier. The graphics you see here all over the place are great. This car has excess height, talks about deck ABC. We've got some other data up here. Our car capacity, jack placement, all kinds of really cool, finely detailed graphics, trust fund marking, lift and jack here. Again, excess height here on the ends. I don't know if you can even read that on the ends. Not only the excess height, but talk about the doors. And built by Menards 2023. So this is a new batch. If you can read that, yes, Menards 2023. So this is a new batch, as I thought. In case you're wondering, the doors do not open on these. Okay, now for something on the bad side with the marking. First of all, the number here, in order to keep them individually numbered, this is common with Menards cars. It's a separate sticker, and it's usually slightly crooked, like this one is. The other downside is the reporting mark right here. Now, TTX is Trailer Train, is a corporation that basically pools rail cars. In this case, with auto racks, the racks are owned by the individual railroads and are marked as such, and the flat car itself is owned by TTX. Now, different classes of flat car have different sets of reporting marks, and DTTX, that reporting mark would be used for a double-stack container car. Obviously, that's not what this is. For the proper reporting marks for auto rack cars would be either ETTX, that would be a tri-level auto rack, a TGTX would be a bi-level, and then there's also CTTX, which is a convertible where the racks can be converted from double high to triple high. And as you can see here, there is a spot here where the individual railroad that would own the rack could be marked, but there's no markings there. So you can add your own sticker, make one, or decal or whatever. The other issue, and this is a minor nitpick, is with the TTX, the flat cars, even if the top is this oxide red, or they call it a burgundy color, the flat car itself, the bottom, is almost always in TTX yellow with the black markings. How many people are going to know that? Just, rail fan nerds like me. This is not a scale car by any means. Real auto racks are going to be 89 feet. So we're measuring out 16 inches across the body, which comes out to 64 feet, significantly short of 89. However, the height on these is pretty close with the O scale, so it just has a good O scale look to it. We also have some good underbody detail. Now the trucks, these are the plastic version of the Menards truck, still with metal wheels, but this is all plastic trucks and couplers. So what if you want to combine these with Lionel cars that were made earlier? So here is one of Lionel's MPC era tri-level auto racks, and you can see Lionel's version is much, much smaller. The height, as you can see, is about right. If you put a roof on top of this, the height is about the same. Despite the size of the car, there's not as much weight as you would expect. It's not as light as the Lionel car because there is this heavier underframe, although that feels like a thick plastic rather than a metal. Still, there's a little more heft than the Lionel cars, but you're not going to want to put this up front with a bunch of post-war cars behind it, especially on tight curves. Speaking of tight curves, Menards does say that this will navigate 027 curves, although I would not attempt 027 turnouts just from common sense. The Lionel version just barely clears 027 turnouts, and you see how much shorter it is. And we have a coupler issue. A common problem with Menards couplers, particularly the plastic ones, this is also true of Lionel plastic couplers of the 80s, there's just not enough mass here for this pin to hold back resistance on the knuckle. And so occasionally you get one that wants to pop itself open. So what we're going to do is I'm going to grab a small O-ring, and I'm going to wrap right around here around this armature. It's going to hold the armature and the pin in place without gluing the coupler shut or anything crazy like that. Coupler will still work, but it shouldn't pop as freely. That is a 5/16 rubber O-ring from an assortment from Harbor Freight, and it holds things securely. Honestly, this is the first Menards coupler I've ever had trouble with. I have had this experience with lots of Lionel couplers through the years, so that's how I knew how to handle it. Speaking of couplers, as I was working on this, I noticed that the thumbtack portion on the bottom of the coupler is all plastic, so there's nothing metallic here for a magnetic uncoupler to catch onto. Also, while we have it parked here on this 042 curve, you can see even on this 042 how much overhang there is. And in fact, this comes dangerously close to striking the motor housings on my K-Line 042 turnouts. I definitely would not try these on 027, 031 remote turnouts on the curves. you're probably going to run into some problems with that. So 042, I'm going to say, is the absolute minimum radius on these large cars.
The airbrake test was good, so let's get ready to move. Roger that, we are ready to roll. Let's go. Dispatcher, 3945 East is ready to proceed. 3945 East, confirm you're ready. Alight with track 1, is ready.
Now let's talk about height. So here we have the top of our car. This is your highest standard Lionel trestle piece. So you see that if you're using regular Lionel trestles and tunnel portals and such, you may have some clearance issues, as from the bottom of the track to the top of the car is just shy of 5.5 inches. The car is tracking reasonably well, considering there are 6 cars and a caboose behind it. Now, granted, these are not heavy cars. You know, there's a bit of weight there, and I was expecting there to be a bit more of a tracking issue, but there's enough weight that you could put, a train load of 4 of these back to back to back to back without having any trouble, as long as you're using, I'd say, 042 and larger track. Looking at the undercarriage, I would say that if one were so inclined, you could unscrew the underframe and probably get inside to add some additional weight if you wanted to. And here you can see how the height of this car just dominates over an MPC era high cube boxcar by Lionel. Even though the high cube car is taller than your typical Lionel boxcar, this auto rack is significantly taller. So you would definitely want to mix this in with more of your scale-like rolling stock. So to recap, the pros for the auto rack are, first, they're big and impressive. Second, while they're too short for a scale car, the other dimensions are right, and the car looks good with scale equipment. Third, the car has excellent graphics and details, and these cars are priced right, retailing for only $39.99. About the same as a new in-box Lionel enclosed auto rack that is much smaller and less detailed. On the con side, these cars may be too big for many layouts. Check your clearances on curves, tunnel portals, bridges, and especially turnouts. You might get away with traditional Lionel Model 022 switches and FasTrack turnouts, but 027 and others with large motor housings are almost certainly out. Also, to keep costs down, these cars have plastic trucks and couplers. Metal would be much nicer, but they would certainly add to the price of the cars. Also, because the cars are near scale, they don't work well with other brands of auto racks, especially Lionel's earlier enclosed auto racks. And there are also some prototype issues with the reporting marks, the DTTX, and the brown flat car platform, which should be yellow. So weigh the pros and cons for your layout before you purchase. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and if so, please give it a like, a share, subscribe, and leave your comments. What do you think of these Menards cars? And whatever the size of your layout, keep the trains running, and we'll catch you next time on Toy Train Tips and Tricks.